Welcome back to the CONVO Couch, everyone. I am Pasta Jardula, and Johnny is still spinning on those ones and twos. Today we have in the house, on the couch, old school. I mean, I'm telling old school, soapbox progressive, Jamarl Thomas. How you doing, Jamarl?
What's going on, man? I'm doing all right.
It's so great to see you. So great to finally meet you. I mean, we've been doing this for 2.5 years on the CONVO Couch, and I remember watching you before I even thought about doing this, man.
Really?
Yes, old school. I remember your interview with Jimmy. I think it was in the convention in Chicago or something.
Yeah.
I can't remember where it was, but that's when I started watching Jamarl. I mean, what made you get into this and think about, hey, man, I'm gonna be an independent media personality?
I got pissed off. That's where we began it in. Honestly, so on. I think when Sanders ran for that race, it like a lot of people, I think it kind of it woke you up to some degree. It like I was sick of the Democratic Party in general, and that race maybe more than anything else. I mean, I voted for Nader, so my political proclivities were already in that direction, even if they were somewhat unconscious. But I got pissed off. I started looking at the world through historical terms, and I didn't understand how the government was acting in ways that was just completely irrational from the propaganda that we're given in regards to the way the government behaves. Meaning, like, from the time you're a kid to the time you get older, most people don't entirely pay attention to politics, but you tangentially believe on some level that these guys are supposedly working for your interests, and there are these philosophical debates that Republicans and Democrats have, but they're opposite sides, and we have the greatest democracy on earth. And you realize that's not true. I mean, basically, these guys are bought, and they're functioning in the interest of class interests, in pursuit of either ideological ends or, for the most part, of people, the incentives that are awarded to them for towing a particular line. I got pissed off. My thought was, this is not the way a rational society should behave, and that from the standpoint of the population itself, it should be unacceptable. And so doing show after show, initially it was just me being, angry or whatever. Then somewhere along the way, it started to moderate, and I started to grow it, where it's like, all right, well, let's get a camera, let's get a desk, and it just kind of grew. My wife looked at the show as always the other woman, because I would, do my job, and then I would come home and spend another 3-4 hours working on the show. But after a while, when I first got that maybe 1,000, that's when she started looking at it as being real, and it started to evolve from that point on. So,
I mean, we're
watching, man. Thank you.
No, it's. I appreciate you doing what you do. I mean, like I said, you were an inspiration to us. It's. We were kind of pissed off too as well when we started this thing. We said we just got to get out there. Like, nobody's covering our candidates, nobody's going to our events. The mainstream media is just doing their own thing. It's the class issue once again.
Yeah,
we just got to get out there and do it. And we would look to guys like Nico, you, Tim Black. Was there anybody who inspired you, in the beginning to do so?
No, because it wasn't. That's how it didn't start that way. Like well, that's not entirely true. So my channel is just named Jamarl Thomas because I just had a YouTube channel, and I would just put up a video. Like, it wasn't this notion of I'm going to be X or Y. It was just kind of evolved just naturally on its own. During the time where I started, I think I was watching Door, Sane Progressive. I think before Sanders ran, or during the time Sanders ran, TYT, that eventually went down pretty quickly when Jen Krieger comes out and say, hey, go vote for Hillary Clinton, that ended it. Not to mention the Russiagate stuff, that pretty much destroyed any association with that. But there were a few channels. I mean, those were probably the 3. Real News Network eventually started coming in. But I started looking at that stuff as, I didn't look at it through the lens of, I'm going to do this to be somebody else. I kind of looked at it just as it just evolved on its own. And it's just so happened to be various people who I just watched for information.
Yeah. I think I matriculated to you too, because that's what it is. It wasn't like you just want to do this to become popular or famous. You're doing this because you feel a need to do it, like a responsibility to do it. That's why I've always liked you and watched you a lot, because I was like, he's doing this because he feels like it's his civic duty, and he's doing it well. So let's get right to it. Let's get to some questions over here, because I know people are kind of yearning. So let's start off right off the bat. Before we get into all the mistakes of the Sanders campaign. Okay, before we get into that, straight up, Jamarl, did Joe Biden rightfully win this primary, or was it rigged? And when I mean rigged, I'm talking about like the planned suppression, the invalid mail-in ballots, the flipping of the electronic machines because we have no open source software. All the software is owned by companies. Did Joe Biden win this straight up, or was it rigged?
I would say this. If you take the lowest common denominator, Iowa was horrendous. And I have a hard time believing, even from those people who think, oh, there's nothing wrong with this electoral process, even that I don't know how you come away with Iowa thinking that Iowa was a fair process. I just don't see how. Meaning, whether you want to go to the level of the electronic machines are flipping votes, whether you want to go to the level of voter suppression in the sense of shutting down polling locations and everything else, it is a clear case that Iowa, where you have this weird relationship between the Buttigieg campaign and the app maker that created this app that supposedly is supposed to count votes. And then you find out that the votes that they were tallying, they came out to put it in perspective and say, look, we were doing this and we took our time because we wanted to make sure that these votes totals were accurate. And it's like, dude, this is wrong. They still haven't validated those election totals yet. That's how screwed up Iowa was. So if a person even just wanted to go to that point that says, yes, the Democratic Party clearly was showing malfeasance in the way that they went after Sanders or assisted Buttigieg in changing the narrative going forward from Iowa, then yeah, I think that's cheating. If you want to go forward and say there's no transparency in regards to our electoral process in the various states, I think that's also true. That's disconcerting, to put it mildly. Any country that believes itself to be any kind of representative government, you should be very clear that your election process is not rigged. Like, that just seems to be the most natural, rational thing in the world, that I shouldn't have to guess whether or not they're rigging this process. I should know that it's not being rigged, just in the process of a democratic system. It's weird that that's not the normal point of view. Like, think back to when Clinton was running against Trump back in 2016. And Clinton couldn't bring herself to get a vote tally checked in Wisconsin. And they were charging millions of dollars just to verify whether or not the vote was accurate. So if you have to pay millions of dollars to figure out whether or not the vote is accurate, what's the incentive? It basically creates a disincentive for taking that extra step of determining whether or not the vote tally was legitimate. Like, that's such a weird way of going about politics to just say, oh, I just trust the system because I just trust the system. But you don't want to know?
Yeah. No, you know what? I'm going to make sure we clip that up. I'm so glad that I asked you that question. You've given me the best answer so far on that. We talk about this a lot. Me and Fiorella and Jonny, we're electoral activists. We get out there. We follow elections. That's what we do. We went all around for the primaries. And like you said, it should be a clear and transparent process, and there should be a hiding of that. And the fact that we don't do that, it's just such a weird freaking thing. And I don't understand how the people could stand by and just allow these results to constantly come in.
Well, the wild part is mainstream media would even take the argument. I remember one time, I think it was Jeff Weaver mentioned, look, these guys are, there's malfeasance in this process. This looks like they're cheating. And the media said, look, doesn't it worry you that you saying that there's cheating in the electoral process will tarnish the faith in our electoral process of the American public? And it's like, what? You mean the fact that we could be being cheated in a rigged process, that matters less to you? You're more bothered by the fact that you're enunciating the fact that you're being cheated. How bizarre is that? Like, we have such a weird propaganda around, maybe it's the exceptionalism thing. Like, if you spend your entire time saying we have the greatest elections on the planet, and then you find out that's not entirely true, but the public doesn't necessarily all that much challenge it. The media doesn't bring it up. You don't necessarily know any better from the system to which you're learned or taught. And so this is what we get, where this weird propaganda of the greatest elections on earth without having the capacity to actually challenge the elections. It's bizarre.
Yeah. Why do you think Sanders ignores it and doesn't ever bring it up? He didn't fight for it in 2016 when we had the WikiLeaks documents leaked to us, all the emails and everything. It was apparent they were cheating. Yeah. And now again, we see this because I have a hard time really believing that Joe Biden got almost 500,000 votes in Los Angeles. You know what I'm saying? It's where I live, and I can only speak for where I live. I mean, the guy didn't show up to any of the conventions in California. And a lot of people, and there were electoral activists who were ready to rock and roll after the first Tuesday and say, come on, Sanders, challenge this. Make sure every vote counts. Why has he remained silent on this, Jamal?
Well, when you think back, no Democrat challenges the elections. I mean, John Kerry was cheated pretty much in Ohio or something like that. You had this kind of dodgy vote count, and he wouldn't even challenge it. He couldn't even bring himself to challenge it. His vice president at the time was like, "Yeah, we're going to fight this," and John Kerry had already given up before they even got to that point. Al Gore, same thing. Al Gore. Yeah. All of these African Americans in Florida, that's right. The hundreds of thousands of African Americans disenfranchised. You couldn't get one random hack Democrat to come out and back up those claims in the Senate. And Al Gore weekly gavel down one person after the next who was going up trying to get him in office. Hillary Clinton, like I said, wouldn't do it in Wisconsin in regards to like a small margin of vote tally separating her and Trump. None of them do it. Now, Democrats have this kind of weird thing with challenging the electoral process. It's almost like they don't want to touch that rail. Now, I think part of this is fear around the notion that your elections are kind of like a civil war. It's like a low-level civil war. You have these various political parties. In the old days, these political parties will have paramilitary wings, and these paramilitary rings will be fighting in the streets. It's all like a low-level civil war. We eschew that by basically saying we're going to have a fair process where the person who gets the most votes is the person who wins and is governed. But what happens when you have one political party that starts to challenge the veracity of whether or not that process is indeed accurate and fair? Well, you have a population that no longer believes that the people who get elected are in fact elected. The conversation that we're having right now is indicative of that. How do I know that that guy got elected? And how can that person have legitimacy if I don't in fact believe that person got elected legitimately? Like, if challenging the electoral process, at least for establishment Democrats, creates a crisis within the system itself regarding who takes power, how they take power, and whether or not the system is accurate. And I don't think they necessarily like to touch it. That's what I think it boils down to.
You know something, it's kind of funny because when it comes to the impeachment situation, I was totally against it because they weren't going to go after him for emoluments because they were guilty of emoluments themselves. Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, they were carpetbagging all over the fucking Ukraine. And when it comes to the elections, it's the same thing. I mean, I think they cheat in different ways. It seems like Republicans try to, I don't want to say legitimately, but they try to delegitimize, people of color and immigrants or immigrant-borns or people they think that are going to be, Democrats that will vote against them. Whereas if the Democrats, they have their, and they do. And they did. We talk about the Florida thing. Right, they do. They do. But you know what I'm saying? And once again, it's about their ideology. They don't believe that certain people, if a felon, should vote. They don't believe an immigrant that wasn't born here should vote. That's their ideology. And they don't have no problem hiding that. And they put that forward. But the Democrats, they seem so much more nefarious and sinister with the mail-in ballot thing, because that's the way I'm thinking that a lot of shit went down in this primary. It was the old 1960 something when Kennedy and Nixon ran. I don't know if you ever looked into that election, but in Texas and in Chicago, I believe your hometown, aren't you from Chicago or no?
No, Richmond, Virginia. No. That's my hometown.
Richmond, Virginia. Well, it was Chicago, somewhere in Illinois, and it was somewhere in Texas, where Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was vice president, had some connections, and where Kennedy's daddy had connections, where all these dead people had mail-in ballots come on in. So I think the Democrats, once again, they use these tactics that are a little bit different than the Republicans, but that's why they don't push it, because I don't think they want to get caught themselves. You know what I'm saying?
So. Yes and no. I think yes and no. I don't think, I think Republicans are just as bad and just as nefarious as Democrats. I mean, if you think of the voter ID legislation.
You do?
Oh, yes.
Because they didn't cheat Trump. They didn't cheat Trump, but we cheated Sanders.
If you think of, but Republicans don't do it internally to the party. They do it externally from the party.
That's better. Well, that's better. That would be better than where the Democrats are, because they only do it internally, and they didn't do it for the election. It was like, if you're going to pick the primary,
right, like if you're going to do it to the other party. Come on. Right. If you're going to cheat, cheat the other guy.
Know that meme.
I guess my point is the Republican Party takes a concerted effort with this notion of, they don't want everybody to vote. And whether that's an ideological thing, I would make the point that that's a thing that's incentivized because of their own self-interest. The less people to vote, the better chance they have in winning the race. But the same thing is true for establishment Democrats within the context of the party, meaning the elderly voter being that much more likely to get that vote in as opposed to the younger voter. So shutting down polling locations and those type of things tend to work against the left as opposed to working against the establishment part of that party. But I guess I'm just making the point that both of them do it in different ways. Like that's I think the point that you're trying to make. Both of these guys find ways to undermine the vote share of the people who they don't necessarily want. And in doing so, this notion of democracy, this notion of, this higher ideals and symbolism of American democracy and whatnot, that stuff matters less. What is in my self-interest, and how do I perpetuate that self-interest? I think that's what we have in our electoral system.
That was a great answer you gave. I just got chills right now at my body, because I'm here talking to Jamarl Thomas, old school, who I used to watch back in the days. I used to watch you back in the days when I used to watch Nico in his car, and Tim Black used to do the coffee thing, and the same progressive. I mean, I used to watch all you guys, but I just love your opinions on everything. And you even mentioned something too as well, that the suppression of keeping young people away from the polls by long lines. A lot of people don't understand that. And I tell people this all the time. And I even have election activists argue with me the fact I said that early voting is going to always tender more moderate to conservative people. They're going to get out there early. They're going to vote early. The mail-in ballots come in early. And they went for, they said they went for Joe. And the later voting is more like, liberal to progressive. The Bernie bros, the people who have consumed, the young ones. So I'm glad that you know that, and you talked about that. There's a lot of great things I'm going to clip up for this video.
Think for the moment of those long lines, and think of what that means. You have a younger demographic. That younger demographic tends to be poor. And in addition to tend to be poor, they're more vulnerable in regards to our economic space. They're going to have more bills in regards to college loans and this other stuff. The job they're going to get, they're most likely aren't going to have massive amount of experience once you're getting out of high school, or even for that matter, going into college. So the job they're going to get is usually low wage and minimum wage. And so, when you have those people having to stand in those long lines like that, how do they do that and have to get to work? How do they do that? Are they going to lose their position if they're in a line for 4 hours? Can you stay in a line for 4 or 5 hours if you have to work that day? Like, all of that stuff comes into play and cuts against the lower part of the economic spectrum, basically a class argument. It's a problem, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And the Democratic Party, for the longest time, never touched it. They, their unions are being destroyed in regards to the electoral process. They don't bring it up. The voter rights bill gets ripped apart. The arms get ripped off the voter rights amendment legislation. Don't bring it up. Like, they get marginalized over and over again in the political space in this thing with Republicans, and it doesn't necessarily seem to be one of their main issues of contention or fighting over. It's strange. It's very strange.
I don't know if it's strange. I think it's by design. But what you just said, there was some really juicy stuff. I can't wait to cut it up later for my quick cuts on. No, I mean, it's really good stuff. I mean, this is the stuff that really gets us going, Jamarl, because when we talk election integrity, it's not a sexy issue. It really isn't. A lot of people don't watch our stuff, as opposed to the stuff we're going to get into right now. We're going to talk about Bernie's mistakes, policy, the whole 9 yards. People love that stuff. But the younger people, and you talked about it, and I don't think the younger people realize they're getting beat over the head because they're not paying attention to this stuff. And they're the ones that are getting screwed at the end of the day. And it comes in the form, when it comes to voting, in those long lines. We looked at the pizza, they had the whole, come on, donate money to bring pizza to people in line. We looked at the LA one. It was like almost every spot, LA. Like, there were lines, and we saw this coming. It was like the slow moving meteor. And we're like, listen, they're going to screw over Sanders over here. But Sanders won. He won California. Yeah, but he didn't win by the way he should have won.
That's right.
And he should, Biden, in all honesty, should not have reached viability whatsoever. He should have got close to 15%.
Yeah.
Once again, we don't have transparency. We have a 1% audit in LA. It's ridiculous. I don't want to get deep down that rabbit hole. I want to talk a little bit more about Bernie Sanders. But aside from the election rigging, Jamarl, what was the Sanders campaign's biggest mistake?
Sanders, in spite of all of this rhetoric, this revolutionary rhetoric, we're going to have a political revolution. I need you to go out there and fight for somebody like you're fighting for yourself. We're going to take on the billionaire class and the Democratic establishment and media establishment and the pharmaceutical establishment. We're fighting everybody. So that's where Sanders was coming from. And then you find out, I'm buddies with Joe Biden, so I don't necessarily want to push it too hard.
Yeah.
What? How do you can't tell me that the existential issues of climate, or that 500,000 people losing their health insurance or going bankrupt because of healthcare, or all of these people living on the streets, you can't quantify that amount of pain for me, and then not run that campaign with a sense of urgency where that compels. It's almost like somebody saying, I believe in climate change, but I'm still going to do fracking and all of this other oil stuff. It doesn't make sense in regards to a logical thought in those two things being connected. I care about all of this pain and anguish. However, I am not going to challenge the person who's the representation of the billionaire class that oligarchical class. Joe Biden is literally the representation of that class. He is against all of your policy ideas, all of your policy agenda. He is the person that the entire Democratic establishment lined up and threw their body on the line for. By the way, more important to stop Sanders, less important to beat Trump from their standpoint. But Sanders' inability to actually run a campaign with a sense of urgency was his undoing. Meaning because he couldn't challenge the various topics that he needed to. He went from pillar to post just making his stump speech. And fact of the matter is, if Joe Biden is lying about civil rights, you need to challenge him on that. If Joe Biden is lying about Social Security or lying about his Iraq war vote, you need to challenge him on that. And you need to make that point clear that he is lying. If he's lying about going and seeing Mandela, you need to challenge him on that. And especially with the Black vote. That is crucial. There are two sections of the electorate that Bernie Sanders needed to get: African Americans and the elderly vote. Or at the very least, he needed to tear into that. A lot of that had to do with, especially with the Black vote, who keeps the monsters at bay. Meaning, who's the person that keeps the Republicans out of office? Now, this is why Democrats vote, or African Americans vote like 90% Democrat. It has to do with a cowardice or fear against Republicans, not necessarily a love for the Democrat. The same thing is true in this particular race with Joe Biden. That's why his enthusiasm is so low. And so Sanders, who's running in this race where Joe Biden is sopping up the Black vote, Joe Biden is lying about civil rights. Sanders is not making the argument about electability, meaning this guy is unelectable. And not just this guy is unelectable, Hillary Clinton lost, Al Gore lost, John Kerry lost. Why do you think Joe Biden is going to be different? And use that as a mantra early on. I mean, because your issue here is people consider you to be the risky candidate. They look at you and they look at Joe Biden, and despite all of those people losing, their memory is somewhat short-term, and the media looks at Joe Biden and says, this guy's the normal Democrat, this incrementalist, this conservative person that, yes, he doesn't necessarily have all his cognitive faculties, but at the very least, he's the person who is most electable, and the people run behind it. With looking at Sanders thinking, this guy's talking about all of these big policies. This is not the incrementalism that we're used to in the Democratic Party. We need to find the back door, in which case, those people get sheep-herded into Biden. The catch here is Sanders would need to be able to have political combat where the fact that Joe Biden is a buddy of his matters less. Yeah. The fact, this kind of ideological combat where he is perfectly willing to use his supporters as leverage to get the policy demands and concessions that he wants, or run a campaign where he leaves it all on the field, where he's making this argument about civil rights, where he's like, do you remember, and I'll end it on this, do you remember when Nina Turner gets on television on CNN and Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders is asked, he says, hey, Nina Turner wrote an article about Biden betraying the Black community. Now, the journalist asked Sanders this in the middle of a debate, and Sanders' response was, oh, this was something early on. What do you mean this is something early on? She gave you a pathway to make that argument. Nina Turner, your African-American surrogate, basically is giving you the leeway and is telling you this is the pathway you need to go in order to challenge Joe Biden's dominance within the context of the Black vote. Sanders would never do it. So he loses the electability argument, which is, again, the argument that is the most necessary in order to get the Black vote. But he also loses this argument just basically on this, Joe Biden is just being flamingly dishonest. And why is this the guy that you want? And so Nina Turner, because Sanders doesn't challenge the civil rights argument, because Sanders doesn't make the pitch for that particular Black vote, you have the situation where Nina Turner is on television with a Biden surrogate. Now, Nina Turner is surrogating for the person who essentially walked with Martin Luther King and was chained to an African-American woman. To put this in perspective, Joe Biden was the guy who was lying about being part of the civil rights movement and tokenizing the civil rights movement for political expedience in order to get elected. Now, he's taken this basic sacred thing and is basically using that, something that didn't take place. Now, back in the 80s, Joe Biden admitted that he was lying about this. And so it's not like we don't know that he's lying about this very particular point. But nevertheless, on a talk show, you have a situation where Nina Turner is engaging in combat with this other person for Joe Biden. Nina Turner says, look, I stand with King on this issue. And that woman says, you don't have the standing to invoke Martin Luther King. Now, again, Sanders was the one that walked with King. But why does she have the stones to be able to say something like this? Because Sanders completely abdicated his vote share or that fight for the African-American vote by making the point that Biden was lying about civil rights, that making the point that he was lying about the Mandela stuff, making the point that Joe Biden was making the argument that Black folks can't raise their kids, and running videos showing him saying those things, because he completely abdicated this adversarial politics in order to fight for that one specific constituency. Sanders ends up losing out. And, you know, I'm pretty sure there can be multiple autopsies, but I got to be honest, I would start there in regards to an autopsy of why Sanders lost. Electability in the African-American vote and his inability to actually adversarially do what was necessary in order to get that share of votes.
You know, that's interesting, though, Jamal. But I hear a lot of people say that Bernie Sanders wasn't the same candidate in 2020 that he was in 2016. That in 2016, he fought more and spoke more about the class issues, where in 2020, he kind of shifted a little bit and kind of leaned towards the social justice warrior mentality. Do you think he hurt his chances, and do you think he abandoned class issues for more identity politics?
No, I don't buy that at all. I mean, look, it's the Democratic Party.
Have you gone to a lot of Bernie rallies? Because, you know, I mean, the rallies were very different than in 2016 and they were in 2020 in my mind. But go ahead.
Now, I remember the rallies in 2016. I did go to a rally in 2016, not to mention watching several of them. I can't say I've watched the entirety of a lot of his rallies. I've watched his speeches, and yeah, they would have various people on there who were of different identities and demographics, the Hispanic community, for example, or his outreach. But I don't think that's bad. That's just the campaign trying to have outreach to the various members of the various communities that they're using as a constituency. I mean, Sanders was getting a predominance of the Black vote, white vote, Hispanic vote, Asian vote under a certain age. Like, do you not pay attention to, at the very least, throw a rhetorical bone to those groups? But he never deviated on class. Like, if you listen to Sanders' speeches, it is like an hour of just policy. We're going to pass Medicare for all. We're going to pass expansion of Social Security. We're going to do elimination of student debt. Those are class issues. Those aren't identity issues. Like
yeah, but he was still more about we're going to fight for racial justice.
Yeah,
you know, like all the systemic racism. And I'm not saying that he, you know, completely abandoned those other issues and the class issues. It just seems like he paid more attention to that social justice warrior base, where he let a lot of independents, possible libertarians, drift away because he got away from attacking the established as much as he did in 2016.
No, that's fair. But yes, but those are different. Like, so you can make an argument that says Sanders didn't attack the establishment with the ferocity that he needed to and should have done. That's one argument. But that's a secondary argument of he went towards the social justice warrior component of the political space. I don't think that's true. I mean, in fact,
Donald Trump is the most racist, homophobic, worst president of all times.
Yeah,
that kind of you know, rhetoric, as opposed to like saying, "Hey, I don't like Donald Trump, but I'm going to go work with him, and I'm going to demand, you know, he gets something done." It seems like he kind of shifted and listened to Schumer and Pelosi and went that route rather than going, because every single time I hear that Donald Trump is the worst president in modern times, I want to strangle somebody. Yeah. It's not fucking true. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to tell what level of shit they're at, but all these guys can go in one basket and they're bad, and we need a new way forward, somebody that's going to actually represent the people. And when you say those things, you're manufacturing consent to say that Joe Biden is the lesser of two evils and you should vote for him.
No, I understand that, but Sanders may actually believe that Joe Biden is the lesser of two evils. I mean, which is kind of the issue, right? I also think Trump is racist. And, you know, that doesn't necessarily stop me from still talking about class as being the most important aspect of the political space.
You think Joe's racist too, though, I'm assuming.
That Joe Biden said Black people can't raise their kids. Let's put that in perspective, that they need help, you know.
So why is it okay then for Bernie Sanders to put Donald Trump on a different level than Joe Biden, just because of party?
Part of it is party, but I also think there is a difference. Like Joe Biden, for example, Donald Trump coming down when he first puts his hat in the ring for president, and he says, "Yeah, I think Hispanics are racist, or Mexicans are rapists and drug dealers, and I think a few are good people." Well, is that true or false? Are most Mexicans rapists and drug dealers? And if that is not true, then what is he using to make that assessment other than this kind of racial ideology of the world? Like, that's pretty explicit as an example of somebody saying something that is utterly and abysmally racist and giving you this notion of how he perceives the world. That doesn't stop you from making an argument that class is the most important issue and pushing for class-based policies that you think will make the country a better place. That's why I disagree with this. Sanders, just because he's going after Trump in a very specific, particular way, it doesn't necessarily mean that he was somehow deviating from the policies. At which point did he deviate from the discussion of policy? Like, when he's giving his some speeches, he may say racial justice. Don't misunderstand me. But he has a broad multiracial coalition that he's bringing together. And truth of the matter is, race is inextricably linked to class. Like, it's hard to kind of separate those things, even though the Democratic Party makes a tendency to do so. Meaning they talk about identity in lieu of economics, as if those two things are just separate and distinct from one another. And those things are that's not necessarily true. My bias is towards class, because I think class is a thing that you can materially deal with the concerns and the difficulties of the various people in the society. And in doing so, I even think you will bring down racial tensions, as opposed to trying to work it the other way, which is why I think the class thing is more important.
I say that all the time. I say, give us more money and resources so we can break bread together and have dinner together, and that will naturally bring the racial issues together. Yeah. We talk about it all the time. In fact, just recently I had a candidate on, and I thought I was going to get her when I said, what's more important, economic issues or social issues? And she said economic issues, because it brings the social issues, kind of bridges those gaps when we have those issues. But okay, well, we can talk about that for long. But why did you think Bernie Sanders built a coalition with the Yang Gangers, with the Tom Steyer crew? And more importantly, why didn't he build a bridge with Tulsi Gabbard?
Now, that's the good question, right? I have to be honest, in my wildest fantasies, just at home at 2 a.m. between me and my God, I thought, I hope they're working behind the scenes. Like, I really hope.
We hope so too. We hope so too.
I really hope they were working behind the scenes, because my thought was, you need somebody as an ally, and it damn sure ain't Warren. And so, and I'm like, he believed it was Warren. Like, I'm like, for a year, I've been screaming that Warren is not your friend. She's a political actor. She's not an ideological actor. She's a political actor, just like she was in 2016. And then the Political article on Sanders and kind of this autopsy of what was going on behind the scenes, when she didn't endorse him, he's shocked by this. He's like, she didn't endorse. She's been attacking you for months. Yeah. She's been attacking you for months. She gave Joe Biden a pass and decided to go all out. When she got out of the race, she turned around and attacked Sanders on Rachel Maddow. And so he's still shocked by, like, I can't believe she didn't endorse me. And he's like, maybe she's not as progressive as I thought. No shit, Sanders. No shit. Like really? Like, how did you not believe that the person who was cutting into your vote totals the entire race, the person who said, I'm not going to take a super PAC, was grifting votes from the left, grifting support, grifting money from the left, and then gets in the situation where on a dime accepts a super PAC to stay into the race for Super Tuesday, to split the vote on Super Tuesday? Now, how do you come away with that process and say, yeah, we're on the same team? How? How? I don't know how you come away with that process thinking that, but he did. Like,
he did build
and by the way, he did try to make deals with Steyer and Yang, and they weren't on board for it.
Where did you get that from?
It's either in BuzzFeed or Political's article on the behind the scenes of what was taking place in the campaign, that apparently at some point Sanders made overtures or tried to reach out to the various campaigns. But at that point, they had already gone, pretty far into the process, and neither campaign was willing to back Sanders on this. Gabbard different. Yeah. Gabbard, I don't remember.
Well, what are your thoughts on Gabbard? Why? I mean, here's a person who stood up for him at every single time there was an issue. There was Tulsi Gabbard standing up for Bernie Sanders. You know what I'm saying? In 2016, in 2020, this time out, every single time she was on that stage, she laid a smackdown, and she did that at the behest to help Bernie Sanders, because Bernie Sanders, in this political climate of the left that we talked about, you got to be careful if you're a white man going after a black woman like Kamala Harris. Don't worry, come in, Tulsi Gabbard, handle it, right? What was Bernie thinking? Because we also talk about another connection. I was a Tulsi supporter, and I love Bernie Sanders. I was expecting to get in the streets for Bernie Sanders once he won the primary. Support Tulsi in the support Bernie in the general, Tulsi in the primary. That was my thought process. It never happened. I hope they were working behind scenes together. But what was Bernie Sanders' issue? Why didn't he make that connection with Tulsi Gabbard? And it's deep. So go ahead.
See, I don't know if this is just idiosyncratic in regards to Sanders. Like, he just has quirks about his personality where he doesn't necessarily do those connections well. I don't know if, because I don't know if this is one of those things where there's a specific reason. in the overt sense, like where he just didn't want to do it because of some kind of I don't want to make an association with Gabbard. Like, I don't think it was that. I don't even know.
You don't think it was that? You don't think it was Fayez Shakur and Matt Dust, who were like from Center for American Progress, who he had the head of his campaign, who really just didn't like Tulsi Gabbard, especially Fayez. Pakistani born. He had an issue with Tulsi Gabbard, and it seemed like Bernie Sanders listened to either one of them or somebody and just stayed away from Tulsi.
I can't tell, right? I mean, that's one of those hard things to figure out, because there was political incentive to not engage with Gabbard in that way. I mean, they ostracized her when Hillary Clinton came out and attacked Gabbard. When the media would be like, "Hey, so I heard you were against gays at one point," and they would ask her that question every time, despite the fact that she's answered that question 1,000 times. "Hey, I heard you were talking to Assad." They would ask that question over and over again. They were intentionally hitting her in the knees for the party. I mean, that's the way I considered it. The marginalization, the attacks, the slanders, calling the woman a Russian plant or Putin pup, all of these horrible, horrible things. And so when you do that, you create somewhat of a smearing effect on the individual, where people sometimes don't necessarily want to associate themselves with the person who that is taking place with. It's like an ostracizing the person. I don't know if Sanders was against it because of that. I mean, that's horrendous, honestly. If that was really, because to me, Tulsi Gabbard always got my tacit approval. Basically, she stepped out and backed Sanders in 2016. That was something that many of the other people didn't do. None of them had the stones to do, whereas Warren attacked Sanders relentlessly in this race. Like you say, Gabbard, in many cases, came out backing Sanders or stood up for him, especially after the sexual misogyny claims of Warren. So, I think he's did himself somewhat of a disservice by not, to some degree, working with her campaign, even if it's just behind the scenes. But I don't know if there's a reason entirely to it. But maybe you could be right. I mean, it could just be this kind of internal politics thing where they just know, but they don't necessarily tell, and they ostracize her because of such. But I don't know. Yeah. It is weird.
What about Tulsi's endorsement of Joe Biden? Is she deserving of the criticism she's receiving for this, even though she said she was going to back the nominee?
Yeah, she was going to back the nominee regardless. Also, I think it's fair to say that how can you go after Tulsi Gabbard for backing Biden when Sanders is going to do the exact same thing? Like, I don't know how you can give one a pass but not the other. That said, I have to be honest, from a political standpoint, I would have endorsed Sanders. Regardless of whether or not Joe Biden would have won the nomination or not, I would have endorsed Sanders. Now, my reason has to do entirely for optics. I don't want my vote tally or my endorsement going to Joe Biden if I'm running that race as a lefty. I just don't want it. And so I can dodge endorsing Joe Biden because Joe Biden is not going to come around asking Tulsi Gabbard for any kind of support or her votes or anything else. These guys have attacked her relentlessly. So basically, she would be able to get out this race just with an endorsement for Sanders, and she packs up her tent and goes somewhere else with just that on the record of, well, I endorsed Sanders in 2016, I endorsed Sanders in 2020, as opposed to doing the Biden thing. By the same token, is she deserving of criticism for it? I mean, it depends on whether or not you believe that lefties should back Joe Biden. I don't think lefties should back Joe Biden. I think it's one of the weakest positions we can take in regards to getting something done. We've done that for 50 years. Something needs to be different. So I don't expend a lot of ire towards Gabbard for making that vote. Like, I don't have too strong feelings one way or the other about it.
Yeah. We don't also know what happened, what was going on behind the scenes when they talked. She did reach out to the campaign. Maybe the Bernie Sanders campaign said, go ahead and endorse Joe. We're going to do that shortly. We don't know. You know what I'm saying? How about Bernie's endorsing, though? I mean, because Bernie's endorsing is a little bit different. Tulsi Gabbard, once again, I never thought Tulsi Gabbard had a legitimate chance to win this time out. You know what I'm saying? Right. I was there for the movement to honestly, see if that she could drag Bernie to the left when it came to foreign policy issues,
right there.
Our civil liberties. But our civil liberties are big, too, as well. Election integrity. She had the best election integrity bill out there, the Securing Elections Act. But Bernie Sanders really was the leader of the movement. He could have really challenged these elections. He could have had a different rhetoric towards Joe. Isn't his endorsement a little bit different, being that he's the leader of the movement, and not the fact that he had just endorsed them? He's riding shotgun on the tour. You know what I'm saying? So what's your thoughts on that?
That's horrible on two counts. Say for the moment that Sanders' objective is really to get Joe Biden elected. Like, say for the moment that he full well believes that Trump is, eating babies and kicking puppies, and that basically he's the apocalypse manifest in human form. Like, if he believes that stuff, and because of such, I must take all powers at my disposal to help Joe Biden get in office. Well, we've already had that experiment of you not getting concessions representing the left and just telling your supporters to go vote for Hillary. You got booed when you did that. And Clinton lost that race. Clinton lost like 15 or 20, whatever that percentage of support. Some of those people went to Trump. Some of those people decided not to vote. Some of the people were like me who voted Joe Stein. But those people couldn't bring themselves to vote for the person who cheated them. And so you've ran that experiment once. Now you have 2020 where you get nothing. You get nothing. You have a movement of millions of people. And despite the revolutionary rhetoric, you don't necessarily use that movement in order to try to compel concessions by making the point that, look, my supporters aren't going to back you unless you're taking on Medicare for all and college debt or whatever. But you make that point that this is not a race to the bottom. There are certain things that we're willing to accept and certain things that we're not. And this notion that you're going to get elected and just blow us off. Well, no, our pain is going to be your pain. And if we can't win, we can make you lose, if nothing else. I mean, that's what do we think unions are? Like when we think of unions and the negotiations that unions are taking place, it's the exact same thing. Unions are in a situation where they're a weaker power in the context of a company. Well, we're a weaker power because our candidate, for the most part, didn't bring his muzzle when he came to a political fight. But beyond that point, the political party of the Democratic Party, an established order, compared to us, we are the weaker party of that. Our Hail Mary pass didn't necessarily manufacture anything. So now this is where we are. So now it's a negotiation of us saying, this is what we want. And if you're not willing to come to this particular level, then you're not getting our support. We will make you lose. Now, unions do the exact same thing when unions say this is a level of subsistence we are not willing to accept, and we are walking off the job and putting the company and their own jobs at risk in order to make the point that we're not willing to accept the standard. But lefties, for as much as they talk about unions, don't think of that way in the political space. And they're willing to acquiesce and just accept Joe Biden. And that's why I said that's one of the worst things for Sanders. If Sanders came to supporters and says, look, I got him to back Medicare for all. I got him to back college. He's not going to do everything because he's Joe Biden. However, I was able to get these political concessions. Then just through a natural process, he will peel away support from people who might have been against Biden initially. That's taking politics in a way where you're bringing your support over based on concessions and based on people saying, okay, fair enough, I couldn't win, but at the very least, I'm getting this. Well, he has nothing to offer because he never pushed for it. And so you have this weird process where he's coming to supporters now running shotgun for Joe Biden saying, yes, this guy's against all of our policy objectives, but still put him in office anyway because Trump is horrible.
But Trump, I mean, and that's the thing. Well, there's two things to keep in mind too, Jamarl, when I think about this is number one, that I'm done trying to move anybody to the left. After 2016, when they were like, oh, we got to move Hillary, the Unity Commission, you got dick. You didn't get anything for it. You're not going to get anything for it. And I don't expect Joe Biden to be honest and really, keep his word when it comes to
the other part.
Stuff he wants. He's not going to keep
You got to believe him. That's right. You got to believe him.
And number two, let's not forget here, the Democratic Party won because their objective was to beat, like you said, Bernie Sanders. So, do you really think that Donald Trump can be beaten by Joe Biden? Do you think that Joe Biden has a legitimate chance to beat the Don?
Yes, but not for anything that he does. More so because of the COVID-19 thing. Donald Trump has taken explicit policy. He's taken, you must understand what Trump is doing regarding policy and what Fox News is doing to back Trump up. Donald Trump gave out $1,200 to the American population. Mnuchin, who's worth like $400 million, basically said that $1,200 should be able to last people for like 10 weeks. Now, that's utterly ludicrous. Now, we're talking about, 26 million people that lost their jobs, 43% of the population that has either lost their job or have their wages cut. You have, about 10 million people who no longer have health care because our health care is tethered to our jobs. So you have a huge amount of stress and strain within the context of the population. And Trump, his response is $1,200. Why? Because Donald Trump is fighting for the owner class. And just like the Democratic Party, who gets money from this owner class, is basically taking a position that he needs to open the economy back up as soon as possible. It doesn't matter that people are going to die in that process. So him doing that is creating a huge amount of stress to incentivize those people based on their needs to go out there and advocate for reopening the economy, even though they're a minority party. It's like he's astroturfing this. The White House is working behind the scenes doing this. and there are apparently some right-wing groups that make this look like it's something. Yeah.
But don't you think this has a lot to do with the left, the Democrats right now? Right now, it seems like inside the processes of Congress and what's going on, it seemed like Trump was more open to giving more money from the first time, had talked about a UBI, when it's the establishment Democrats and Pelosi and Schumer. And I think everybody's getting the perspective that it's them that's holding it back. That ice cream commercial.
Oh, that was horrendous.
Devastating. I heard you talk about it yesterday on the show. It was so harsh. And I think you could see Donald Trump is out lefting these guys and he's talking about these things, despite the fact that he has Mnuchin on his fucking team, who's one of the worst, and what he did he gave Kamala Harris your money for letting him off the hook. And so many awful practices of the economic crashes when it came to houses and homeowners. Mnuchin was on the other side of taking those houses away. He's just awful. And this time they handed all this money out with no restrictions, no rules, no system on how to get it. And you had colleges who had billions of dollars grabbing the money, corporate chains that got the money, and the little guy got left dwindling in the sand, waiting for today's bill. I guess they're debating on the floor for it right now to, kind of get through and stuff. So, I mean, I think the perception that the Democrats are holding this back and people, the curtain has been pulled out from the Wizard of Oz, and we know Pelosi and Schumer are pretty bad. Let me really quick, Jamal, let me just read some quick super chats. Xavier Foster said, Sanders says, you must vote Biden and lick the boot.
Oh,
thank you for
that's basically what he's saying. Look, I've said before, man, the moment that Sanders went to backing Biden, I think that was the time to drop Sanders. Like, I look, from my standpoint. That happened
months ago, though. That happened months ago. Joe Biden is my friend.
Right, exactly. But that was the point where it's like, all right, yeah, it's time to drop Sanders. I mean, look, from our standpoint of the left, I don't necessarily think that getting in the party structure is the thing that's going to get our issues by policy priorities. We've tried that for the last 50 years. I think the left needs to stand in solidarity around this notion that this is no longer a race to the bottom. And these are the policies we're willing to accept. Otherwise, we will be fine with you losing. That is literally the same policy that the Democratic Party went with in 2020. Think about what they did for the moment. They went to a brokered convention. They were willing to go to a brokered convention and to rip the nomination from Sanders. Now, what does that mean? Do they honestly believe that they're going to win that race if they did that? Like, what burner is going to turn around and vote in mass for a party that ripped the nomination from their guy? Meaning all of them fully understood that they would lose to Trump and they didn't care. Stopping Sanders mattered more. Now, this party that tells the left continuously, you have nowhere else to go, was perfectly willing to sell it all and take it all for Donald Trump in order to stop Bernie Sanders. Like, think about that. That's mind-blowing. The left needs to internalize that, because until they realize that your policy agenda is just not wanted, like regardless of being strung along and all this other stuff, that basically you are not in the same party. If you were in the same party, they wouldn't have been willing to take it to Trump in that way. You are something different. They malign you. You incentivize your own political malignment by folding yourself within the context of the party year after year after year after year without getting anything for it. And so, I mean, the left, look, you made this other point. We need to stand in solidarity on this notion of these are the policies we're willing to accept, otherwise we can make you fail. But the left doesn't do that. For the last, all these years, they've just sowed the farm and just kind of, bid their way in. But I do believe that the pathway forward is standing on this notion of a solidarity around policy and putting pressure on the political edifice, even if you can't necessarily take power within that system.
Yeah. That's my do you think, I saw your video, you said that you think that Elizabeth Warren is going to be Joe Biden's pick for vice president.
So I'm not sure. My initial thought was Kamala Harris.
That or Stacey Abrams.
That was my initial thought. Yeah. But then Joe Biden came out and said something like, yeah, I never said I was going to pick a black woman. And so then it was like, all right, well, do you really say that if you were? Like, wouldn't it be weird if you just like, yeah, I never said I was going to pick a black woman, even though I've just picked a black woman, like that would be bizarre. So it made me think, is it possible that he goes with somebody like Warren? I think that would be a horrible choice. Warren burned her credibility when she didn't back Sanders, like even just based on politics. If Warren wanted to get that VP pick, if she wanted to make an argument to Joe Biden that I can bring you elements of the left, then she should have gotten out that race and backed Sanders, assuming that Joe Biden, if he would have been able to win, at the very least, she could say, look, I did back Sanders. I was with him along the way. Sanders just lost this race. So now I'm giving my support to Joe Biden so I can become vice president. Meaning your argument is emboldened if you, at the very least, have a patina of progressivism associated with the way you can pull the left. But what she did, she burned the left like nobody's business. Like I said, I have been screaming for a year that she was a con. But a lot of people still believe that, no, she's really plugging away for the left. She's really working for us and all this. And it's like, no, dog, she's not.
Well, you know, you and Fiorella were on that early, my partner. She was really like, and I'm like, you know, it's kind of funny, though, since I've gone back and watched a lot of stuff on the Senate floor and I've seen Matt Stoller and been following it, it's like she really did have a moment where she was like the really fighter in the Senate and stuff.
That's
like,
right.
You know, Stoller said, plain and simple, like Geithner laughed at Bernie Sanders. Geithner feared Elizabeth Warren. She wasn't afraid to make enemies, and she would cause a lot of ruckus in that Senate. But a lot of it just seemed to go out the window, especially when you started looking at the money she was taking and who she was taking it from. All that money she transferred over from her Senate run and who it came from. It made it obvious that she was working for the wrong people. And especially
even the identity politics stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
she went hard on that.
She went way in.
Yeah.
I mean,
she went harder than Sanders. I thought Sanders went a little bit harder and kind of got away a little bit, drifted, but Elizabeth Warren was full court press identity politics.
When she, when her campaign collapsed, meaning when she was trying to ape Sanders, you know, policies and all this other stuff, when that collapsed, when she tried to push for the Medicare for all and people realized she was full of it on Medicare for all, well, how can you trust this person for a Green New Deal? Or how can you trust this person for criminal justice reform if the person just lied to you about Medicare for all? It's a trust issue. When she collapsed, she went all in on identity in order to make up the other contingent. And so I remember she said something like she was going to have a trans kid choose her education secretary. Like, what? Like, how? Like, why trans? Like, how do you quantify the pain of one as opposed to the other? Like, that's so bizarre. As opposed to
you got to hit all the groups, baby.
It's so weird.
Trans community's got to pick educate. I mean, yeah, that's typical Elizabeth Warren shit. I'm gonna, I had a couple other questions. I'm gonna skip ahead of a couple because we're going a little bit into this right now. Is it more important for progressives to get rid of Nancy Pelosi or Donald Trump at this point?
Look, I think the problem is the Democratic Party, whatever the Republican Party is. Now, the reason I say that, people often be like, hey, dude, why do you spend so much time on the Democratic Party? I have no expectations from the Republican Party, none. The Democratic Party goes with this philosophical, talking points that they're fighting for the middle class and fighting for the poor and everything else. So if I'm looking to crucify somebody based on either hypocrisy or their own lies, that's the party I tend to crucify in regards to what they're talking about in regards to policy. Whatever and however bad you think the Republican Party is, understand it's that the Democratic Party has allowed them to get to that bad. Now, lefties need to also understand that by us not holding that party accountable, think of elections not in the terms of one election. Oftentimes, Democrats try to focus your mind into one very specific election. Elections happen over the course of time. So you have a situation where a guy is like, yeah, I'll vote for one concentration camp less. And then you find over 10 years that you now have 20 concentration camps, but it's still one less, because the distribution hasn't changed over the years. Like, meaning the country moves further and further to the right while you're still voting for this lesser evil stuff. And because you've given up all notions of accountability in the political process, the party puts up whoever. And so you have a Republican Party that goes further and further to the right also because the distribution is not, you're going to have this wide gulf between the two. When Democrats start agreeing with Republicans just move the goalposts. Like, the accountability and not having accountability in our political process is a large reason as to why we're in the situation we're in now in regards to lefty politics. We have to start somewhere.
Well, it's Megan Morales' super chat contribution. It's a really cool question. Check this out. Would you both agree that the future of the left is non-electoral and focusing at the state level? And how do we hold progressives accountable for bad votes?
You make them lose. You make them lose. That's what accountability means. I mean, think about it for the moment. You make an argument. All of these lefty groups, they came out and they said, we demand that Joe Biden accept Medicare for all and Social Security. And we have $100 million. And then the next question is, are you going to use that $100 million to make Joe Biden lose if Joe Biden doesn't back it? No, we never really said that. So you're just suggesting, you're not demanding anything. That suggestion is going to get ignored. Your ability to influence events in the political space to some degree, if you don't have the ability to take power and you don't have the ability to leverage in other ways, to make them lose. That doesn't, it's not the greatest stick in the world. I don't have this great feeling about Donald Trump winning office and everything else. But I do realize that over the course of time, by not having accountability, we allowed the political space to move further and further and further to the right. It makes it that much more difficult for lefties to get in office because people at that point just consider incrementalism to be the normal. And so these big, expansive policies just seem risky and off the table. We malign ourselves. We make it worse for ourselves in regards to getting our policy objectives accomplished just based on cowardice in the moment. So I think the left needs to stand in a certain degree of solidarity and outside of the political space and pressure the political space, both parties, not just one or the other, but definitely the party if they're mouthing this nonsense about, okay, we're helping workers and we're helping the poor and all of this other stuff. No, hold them accountable. Make the Democratic Party continuously lose until they're willing to appropriate your policy proposals, or for that matter, the Republican Party. I'm just making the point that accountability needs to be added into the political process. And in the same way the Democratic Party was willing to lose to Trump in order to stop Joe Biden, you need to be able to take the same level of politics in order to make them lose until they feel and appropriate your pain, getting to the point even if they can't get elected again because they don't necessarily appropriate your policies. Like, I think that's where the left needs to be. I think it's vitally important to build legitimacy and credibility in the political process. And if you're not willing to use that stick, if they don't believe you're willing to use that stick because they believe you're so terrified that you've made it clear over the last 40, 50 years, then you lose all level of leverage and legitimacy in your politics.
I think you can't. I think you said it best right there. You can't shake the right if you don't hold the left accountable. If there's no accountability on the left, you ain't going to move the right. You ain't going to move anything. And I think that's what it's all about. This was an amazing time, amazing interview. Let's have a little fun. I'm going to do a little rundown, a little trivia. We're going to do Arnold Schwarzenegger. My man Jamarl is a Trekkie. He's 40-some odd years old, just like me. So he should know these movies, all right? Johnny, if you got a little music, we'll have a little fun. All right, so Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. I'm going to give you 4 choices here, Jamarl.
Okay.
A is Commando. You saw
Commando? Was good. Yeah, Commando was good.
Predator.
Predator was awesome. Predator was one of the best ones. Predator and Running Man were the 2 best, I think.
C is the Running Man, so that's my favorite too as well.
Yeah.
And D, the Terminator, right? Johnny wanted to make sure we had the Terminator.
Oh, Terminator. God, I forgot. Like, there's Schwarzenegger has a catalog of movies, man.
Oh, man, he's got old school. Yeah. You ready for this? Here we go.
I'm ready. Let's bring it.
I'm going to do these quick. Don't take too much time. I'll give you a little time to think about these, but here we go. All right, question number 1. In what Arnie movie did he say this? You have a very negative attitude. Now, remember, I could break your neck like the chickens. Was it A, Commando, B, Predator, C, the Running Man, or D, the Terminator?
I think that's Commando.
Final answer?
Final answer.
Wrong!
Oh, what was that?
It was the Running Man. Remember when they were going to he was trying to escape to get on the plane. He was with the young lady. He was with a very negative attitude. Remember, I could stack your neck like the chickens. That was the Running Man.
Funny. Oh, that's funny.
I got a bonus question for you. Do you remember who played the game show host in the Running Man? It was Richard Dawson from the Family Feud.
Right.
Do you remember his first words to Ben Richards when he met him? When Ben Richards got caught at the airport and he meets Killian. You remember his first words?
Oh, I don't remember the first words. I don't remember. I don't have any encyclopedic knowledge of the movie like that. I remember what it was about and everything, but I don't remember like that.
He says to Ben Richards, "Hey, cutie pie." It was the first time he saw him. So, okay, these 4 movies we got: Commando, Predator, Running Man, and Terminator. In which of these movies did Arnie not say, "I'll be back"? Was it A, Commando, B, Predator, C, Running Man, D, Terminator? I'll be back.
I want to say Commando. I mean, I don't think Terminator came out before Commando. I think Commando came out first. So I'm going to say he didn't say it in Commando.
He did say it in Commando. Remember?
No shit.
He said, "I'll be back, Bennett." He said to the bad guy. In Commando, he said it in Terminator, which came out before Commando. The most famous, "I'll be back." That was the first "I'll be back."
Right.
And the movie in The Running Man, when he's about to be sent down the tube, he goes, "Killian, I'll be back." And
right, I remember that one.
In a rerun, right? He didn't say it in The Predator.
Oh, I guess I
never said it in The Predator.
Yeah, I guess my fuck up. I thought Commando came first. Oh, all right. I haven't gotten any of these. I got to get one of these to save.
You got to get one of these right.
Got to get one.
Tough one. Okay, in which Arnold Schwarzenegger movies did he try to obtain a phased plasma rifle with a 40-watt range? Was it A, Commando, B, Predator, C, the Running Man, or D, the Terminator?
Oh God, that can be.
I'll say it like you said, a phased plasma rifle with a 40-watt range. And the guy said, only what you see here, pal.
Oh, Terminator.
Yes, it was the Terminator.
Yeah.
It was the Alamo Sports Shop that he tried to buy it in stuff. All right, here's another one. In the movie The Commando, remember Bill Duke's character? You know who Bill Duke is? Okay.
I think so.
He was the one from Don't Be a Menace to South Central. You know you done fucked up, man. You know you done.
Oh, right, that guy. That guy. I remember. No.
What was his position? What was his army position in the movie Commando when he played the part of Cook?
Oh, he was. God, what was he? Gunner? I mean, because he was a hard ass in that film.
Yeah, he said something. What does he do? What is his position in the military? He said, "You scared? Because this blank blank's gonna kick your ass."
Oh, what, a boxer or something like that? He was
Green Beret.
Oh,
he goes, this
Green Beret is gonna kick your ass.
And Arnold Schwarzenegger says, "I eat Green Berets for breakfast." Out of all those other movies, which other movies was Bill Duke in? Commando, Predator, Running Man, or Terminator?
Let's see. He was in
Commando for
clearly
sure.
He was in Predator.
Yeah, he was in Predator. That was the answer. There you got it.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't in the Running Man, he wasn't in the Terminator, but and Predator, he was Mac.
Yeah.
All right. We got a couple
Predator
more
was
here.
so good. I forgot about those movies. That one was so good. In fact, the second one that came after that kind of sucked. But the original one was really good.
The originals were great. In The Running Man, aside from Captain Freedom, who was played by Jesse Ventura, who Arnold Schwarzenegger never fought, who was the only stalker chosen by the audience not to have been killed by Ben Richards?
What's the guy with the lights, the chubby guy with the bulbs on his all over the place? I can't think of his name. He's like Electro or something.
Dynamo.
She ends up beating
Dynamo.
him. Yeah, that's him, right, that guy.
Dynamo. That is the correct answer. Dynamo is the only one that was never killed. He was killed by the water and the electricity and stuff like that.
Right.
Do you remember who the first kill was by Ben Richards? The stalker who he killed? He's also this stalker spent some time in the WWE.
Right.
He also, back in the days, he was also in a couple James Bond's movies.
Oh man, I don't know who this one is. Yeah, I don't know who this one is. I'm not even drawing a picture.
Remember Professor Sub-Zero? He played Mr. Fuji in the other movies.
Yeah.
That was the first kill that Ben Richards had. Do you remember the line? What he said when he killed him?
Temperatures. Yeah. I don't know.
He said, "Killian, here is Sub-Zero. Now, Plane Zero." Yeah. This game was designed for you to finish second place. Anyways, to be honest with you, I knew Graham was going to win. You were going to finish second, and Kellen was third. But it went the opposite way when we went to politics and stuff. Do you remember? All right. So in the movie The Predator,
right?
They, if you go back and watch, it's kind of funny because they red baited that one part when they showed up into the village where all the guerrillas were. Yeah, and they ended up killing them all. They had a Russian kill somebody. They said, "Oh, it's a Russian who killed an American CIA agent." Do you remember the role he played in The Running Man? That same character. This is a real tough one.
So if he was,
his name is Sven-Ols Thorsen.
Oh, is that Captain Freedom? Is that the
No. It was Killian's bodyguard in the movie. He was also in Red Heat. He was the Russian guy. He was LaFours in Mallrats.
Oh,
same character.
Yeah,
You got to start with Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was a friend of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Arnold got him some work and whatnot.
He just brought him along with him for job after job after job. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So Arnold Schwarzenegger did that with Bill Duke, and kind of sprung Bill Duke's career. Jesse Ventura helped him out in The Terminator. Sarah and Kyle, Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese, they're on the run. They're hiding from the Terminator. Okay, they get a room in a motel. What kind of room did they ask for and why? Do you remember?
No, they were in a motel. So I thought they got a room. Well, whatever room they got, they would have needed to get one where they could have somehow gotten out. So probably with a window in the bathroom or something like that, so they could effectively escape. That would be my thought, but I don't know off the top of my head.
They had to get a room with a kitchen because they were building F2 plastic bombs. Remember, he went and got
interesting. That's right.
He says we need a room in a kitchen. Nope.
That's right.
And the name of the motel, which would be very hard, that's like expert. Do you remember the name of the motel?
Heavenly Acres.
Tiki Motel. Nice try though. I got 2 more questions, a couple more bonuses. In Commando, who played Jenny Matrix?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know the actor's name.
Alyssa Milano.
No shit. Oh, you're right. That was one of her early starts.
Yes.
You are so right. You're so right. She was a kid. Like, she was so young in that.
Do you remember the line that she said to the guy when he said, "Soon you'll be able to join your father"? Wouldn't that be nice?
Did she?
Do you remember her line?
Like no fucking way, or
She goes, "Not nearly as nice as watching him smash your face in."
80s.
Johnny was right. This is a hard trivia. This is hard. I know. See, the thing is, Graham, we got to get all these freaking right. That's the thing. It's so hard.
Well, they've gone it's going like I haven't watched any of these movies for like 20 years. Like, it's been a long, long time. So I'm trying to recall or just kind of previous memory. But no worries.
Okay. Well, this is the last question of the day. And this question I put in for you, since you're a Trek. Okay? State the next line from The Running Man. Begin the satellite coding sequence. Load up the code into Transpander Grid. Shut the power to the main circuits. And Mr. Spock, you have the comm.
Wait. Is this Running Man or is this?
This is the Running Man. They're inside. Okay, they're trying to jam the broadcast so they can get into the system. Remember, they want to put their own thing there. So you got the old man who says, he says, begin the satellite coding sequence. Load uplink code into the transponder grid. Shut power to the main circuits. And Mr. Spock, you have the comm. What did the guy say to him?
Engage or upload sequence initiated or something like that.
He said this, who's Mr. Spock?
He didn't know Spock. Oh, that's so sad.
Come on!
That's so sad.
Johnny, if you got an X, give him an X over here, please, man. Jamarl Thomas, old school, joining us today on the Convo Couch. Thank you so much for coming on, man. I hope you get on the ROKFIN tip and come join us over there. And thank you for doing what you do, man. You've been doing it for so long. You truly were an inspiration to a lot of us independent media guys who kind of followed in the footsteps to say, hey, just get out there, get your voice heard, speak your word, tell the truth. And I can't thank you enough for being one of the people who take the charge in that, Jamarl. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I honestly do. It's like you start the channel, I'm always shocked that people say stuff like that. Because when I started, it was just, I just want to do news. And this is my interest. This is my passion. And so that's kind of the way I was coming at it. So I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Well, you had a big effect on a lot of people, and this thing has kind of sprung out. Where do you see independent media going in the future?
So it depends on whether or not after 2016, there was a push by corporate forces and by political forces in order to try to corral independent media. I mean, they looked at it as a source of information that went around their typical way of corralling the public in order to give them, the information that they want. So independent media, for the most part, has been able to give a secondary perspective. Some people are lunatics, that's true. But by the same token, you've also been able to get a secondary narrative or tertiary or, narrative that goes beyond what the political space is trying to get you to believe. I think that continues. I really do think that it becomes one of those things where media and independent media start to get a little bit more organized in how it does what it does. Becoming almost an establishment in and of itself, because you have so many people now that watches. Like if you think of like the under 40 group, well, they're not watching mainstream media. You're looking at like Fox News, MSNBC, their average age is like 60, 70 years old. And so those people are online predominantly. And I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon. I think it's just going to expand.
Jamarl Thomas, Soapbox Progressive. You can find him on his channel. He's got a good Twitter, got a great YouTube channel, been doing it for a long time. He's old school, OG, but he's got to get caught up on his Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. Hey man, it is quarantine time. You got some homework to do, because next time you come on, we're gonna hit you hard with the trivia. Thank you.
Yeah, I got to beef up on the Schwarzenegger movies. Yeah, my wife and I gonna binge watch.
I expected you to do a lot better.
I'm sorry.
Next time. For Pasta Jardula, Johnny Sue on the ones and twos. Convo out, everybody.
Thanks.